Andrew Graham-Dixon, welcome to the Lives of the Artists.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm very well. Nice to see you again.
You are about to release your book on Vermeer.
I am, yeah.
How long has this been coming together for you?
I don't know how, maybe it's been coming together for about 10 years, but I began thinking about it. It's a terrifying thought. In roughly 1999. That's when I first thought there's something to be done about Vermeer.
What was going on in your life when you thought there's something to be done about Vermeer?
I met this amazing economic historian from Yale called Michael Montias, who in the later years of his life, after he'd retired from being this brilliant economic historian of the black market economies of Eastern Europe, his hobby was Dutch painting. And he discovered, I think somewhat to the chagrin of Vermeer scholars at the time, he discovered most of the Vermeer documents that we now have. So I made a film for the BBC back in 1999 about Montias's discoveries and interviewed him there. And he said to me at the end of filming, not on camera, he said, "You know, Andrew, I really think it's a shame that art historians haven't made more of the information I've discovered. I'd hoped that there would be more breakthroughs when it comes to understanding the paintings, or perhaps getting to the bottom of what the paintings are about, but he's still this great mystery." It's too late for me now. He was an old man, but he was still very intellectually alive, but he wasn't going to do any more on Vermeer. So, and he was sort of, I felt, pushing me a little bit.
So this is a very similar story to the Caravaggio story. You met a man in the Vatican archives that said something needs to be done with this information.
But they're sister projects. It was for the same BBC series. The idea for the series was inspired by the fact that these incredible people had done this incredible work on those two artists in particular. And the Caravaggio book did follow. That was the one I ended up doing first. But the Vermeer and the Caravaggio were conceived at the same time. So the Vermeer's come 15 years later.
Wow.
But the reason it's come so much later is because it didn't, in your words, come together for me. I couldn't find what I was looking for. I was looking, and it was only when COVID kicked in that I think I really accelerated. And I embarked on a really systematic going over of all the archival material. These are documents, documents concerning a loan to a baker, or Vermeer's bread bill, or mortgage payments, quite boring documents. But when you put all the documents together, we're talking hundreds of different things, was there something there? And suddenly one day, I just thought, oh, could that be something? Is there something here? And it was after like 4 years of going through these things and looking at these pieces of paper and just looking for something that might be a path or something that might take me to some explanation of what's going on in his life. And I suddenly found one thing that I thought, well, that could be interesting. And then I followed it up, and then I read something else, and I thought, gosh, that really feels like it's from the same world as Vermeer. It was a religious text. I was reading it and I was thinking, gosh, that could almost be a description of Vermeer's paintings. And so what it was that I'd found was the fact that a number of people in Vermeer's story seemed to be connected to a very, very interesting group of dissident, fundamentalist Dutch Christians who had passionate beliefs about society, and they were disgusted by the terrible wars of the 17th century, and they wanted to bring an end to these terrible wars. And they formed this rather idealistic religious community, society movement, call it what you will. And once I found two people within Vermeer's orbit who seemed to have connections to this movement, I found more and more. And there weren't that many people in that movement.
So can we place Vermeer in time and space a little bit? So he's living through this period of war, and essentially the art market has collapsed, or was it thriving? No, what was going on in his life at the time?
He's born in 1632, so he is born into the later stages of the 80 Years' War. So the 80 Years' War is the war that gives birth to the Dutch Republic. And the first part of that 80 Years' War is brutal and bloody and full of atrocities. And it involves the massacre of town after town of civilians by the troops of the Spanish army.
And it's essentially a religious war?
It's a war waged against these Calvinists mostly, but also Lutherans, other Protestants, who don't want to be part of the Catholic Church anymore. And the King of Spain is just not prepared to have these heretics in his empire. So either they're going to be converted or they're going to die. In the end, neither happens quite the way he hopes. He kills many, many people, but rather, as in the birth of the Venetian Republic, these people realize that if they go north, if they go above the river deltas of the Maas and the Rhine, they and their allies, they can defend those towns, those Dutch towns, that way far. In Flanders and Brabant, they can't defend themselves because the land is too dry, it's too flat, it's too wide, it's too easy for the armies to march and get them. But in these difficult, watery passages, I hate making war. In Holland, said the Duke of Alva, who was the main general of the Spanish oppression, they could defend themselves. And Vermeer's born into the part of the story when the Spanish know that the Dutch can't be got. They just can't get them. They've tried. They've lost 100,000 men to kill 50,000 town inhabitants. And they haven't got infinite supplies of men. That's just one town. They realise they can't do it.
Because they can't fight in this terrain.
They can't fight in this terrain, but it will take you 6 months to take a town. That's one town. And you've then got to take another 10. So by the time you've taken one, you've already exhausted your army's morale, their reserves of food, their munitions. It's just even though you're militarily superior, they can never come out and take the southern Netherlands back. But you won't take the north.
So it's essentially why Belgium is Catholic and why Holland is Protestant.
Yeah, the line that they draw at the end of the 80 Years' War is essentially the same line that forms the northern border of Belgium today. But yeah, so Vermeer is born into that world, which is an aftermath world. So Vermeer's grandfather, Balthazar, on his mother's side, his mother's called Dichna. Dichna and Balthazar are from Antwerp. More or less, the whole of the Dutch Republic is made up. Well, it's a republic of refugees, as Venice was when it was founded. People running away to make a breakaway state, and they make a republic. But his grandfather, Balthazar, was 3 when Antwerp was sacked by the troops of Alva, the mutinous troops of Spain. Alva wasn't in charge by then, but the mutinous troops of Spain, and they killed 8,000 people in the town. This town, I think, had a population of 50,000.
Wow.
So, and Vermeer's granddad was 3. Vermeer's contemporary, the great playwright and historian P.C. Hooft, says, my grandmother told me stories about what happened in Antwerp. My grandmother was a child when they took Antwerp. So these people, they knew their history was soaked in blood.
So Vermeer, this painter of domestic bliss and peace and these peaceful, quiet, hushed scenes of Dutch life, was born into absolute barbaric war.
Yeah, you've begun to understand what the paintings are about without meaning to. You've begun to get it. That's exactly it. That's exactly it. So I was saying at the beginning that I found this sort of connection between the mature Vermeer and a number of people who were part of this religious movement. They're called the Remonstrants. But their history goes back to when Vermeer's parents met in the 1615, 1616, that period. There's a kind of civil war within the Dutch Republic, which is essentially a safe, independent state, but they can't agree exactly what kind of state they are. Now, the Calvinists want them to be a theocratic state in which, just as the Spanish had wanted in a way, if you're not part of the Calvinist church, you're out. You're a heretic. You go into exile. They want it so that no Catholics, no Jews, no Lutherans, no other kind of Protestants whatsoever. And they also are quite keen on continuing war against Spain because they're very militant and they think they've got God on their side. And on the other hand, there's this rebel movement that grows up within Calvinism of people who have been Calvinists all their lives, who say, actually, you've gone so far this way that we don't want that anymore. And they are led by a man called Jacobus Arminius, who's one of the great, in my opinion, is one of the great heroes of early modern Western civilization. Not many people have heard of him now. And his entire family is murdered by the Spanish when he's 14. And he becomes a Calvinist minister. And then he turns against Calvinism and says, enough of war. Even though the Catholics have always been our enemies, we must try to embrace them. We must try to make peace with them. We must try to find common ground with all our fellow Christians. In fact, we need to find a new kind of Christianity where we don't get so obsessed by tiny differences of dogma or doctrine. Was Mary a virgin at the time when she gave birth to Jesus? What exactly is the Trinity? We have got time to argue about those things, but we do not ever want to be killing each other over those things. And he makes this amazing speech. And he says, and by the way, I also think that if somebody is a Muslim, we should welcome and embrace them. And if somebody who's incredibly, for that time, we're talking 1606 that he makes this speech. So he makes this extraordinary speech for peace and for toleration and for openness. And it falls on not deaf ears. The Dutch merchants and the Dutch regents, the people who can see the future for the Dutch Republic, they think he's got a point. We actually want, and partly because it's in their interest, they say, well, we want the Dutch here. We want the Jews here. We want, if there are Muslims with interesting trading concepts, we want them to feel at home here. We're up against Spain. We're a minnow. Trade is what we've got, and toleration and understanding and promoting peace, that's what we want. If all of Europe's at peace, we've got more ships than you can shake a stick at. We can do great business with everybody. So it's sort of partly inspired by selfishness that they agree with him, but it's also partly just the Dutch way, because they also say, well, you Calvinists, you extreme Calvinists, aren't you just basically turning yourselves into another version of the papacy and the Pope and, heretics? There are only heretics and with us and those not with us. We don't think that's the Dutch way. We've always been, live and let live.
I would assume that it's quite a difficult atmosphere to become an artist in that.
Well, this is before he's born.
This is before he's born. This is setting the context, right?
Well, the context is that. And so then what happens is that the Remonstrants just get completely wiped out. There's a coup d'etat. A right-wing kind of tyrannical Prince Maurits takes over, and the Remonstrants are sent into exile. Absolutely, do not come back. They're even less welcome. Catholics are still tolerated in this society. They're still allowed to worship in secret churches. But there's this moment where it looks like the whole Dutch Republic might turn into a totalitarian, right-wing, theocratic Calvinist state, almost like a kind of modern equivalent of Afghanistan or something. But it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen because Maurits dies about 3 years after the coup d'etat, and a more liberal regime takes over, and the Dutch Republic is once again ruled by the regents, the sort of the merchants, and gradually the Remonstrants, the more liberal ones, are allowed back. And by the time that Vermeer's practicing as an artist, peace has broken out across Europe, and the liberal regime that allows Remonstrants to flourish and so on will take out and will more or less rule Holland for the Dutch Republic for the whole of Vermeer's lifetime until 1672, near the end of his life. So he will live his whole life under a kind of liberal regime in which these ideals are tolerated, permitted, allowed. There is the odd Calvinist sort of, no, don't do it. There's the odd sort of knee-jerk, it goes back to being a bit more extreme and a bit more censored. But generally speaking, that tolerant liberal regime.
And the arts flourished.
And the arts flourished during it. Now, the big thing about Vermeer is that everyone that we find in his circle is a member of that Remonstrant community. And he doesn't have to have sort of minor links to them. If you go to the level of his father, when Vermeer's father and mother marry in Amsterdam in the 16 teens, it's absolutely the height of the Dutch Civil War, when Remonstrants and Calvinists are like that. Vermeer's father, his dad is dead, so he can't get his father to come and vouch for him at his wedding. You have to get who's the father figure he chooses, not his stepfather, who he gets on really well with, who pays for the wedding. He gets his sponsor in the Delft church to come all the way from Delft to Amsterdam to sign and vouch for him. Who is that man? the only Remonstrant minister in Delft or Rotterdam. He's the only Remonstrant, he's the leader of the Remonstrant rebellion in that city, is Vermeer's dad's mentor in the church. Vermeer's mother, she's living in Amsterdam. She's come from Antwerp, along with a family called the Rombouts family, and she's living with them. They're looking after her. She's working for them. They're very rich, merchant family. Who are the Rombouts family that she's living with? They are the most powerful Remonstrant family in Amsterdam. One of the sons of the family marries Jacobus Arminius' daughter.
So he's connected.
So he's totally connected.
Very high level.
At very high level. And the last thing Vermeer ever does in his life is borrow the equivalent of £500,000 from the child of that union, from Arminius's. So if you're saying he's a Marxist, he's like borrowing £500,000 off Karl Marx's grandson. He's borrowing money off Arminius. That's the last thing he ever does.
Wow.
So really close connections. But it's almost like we've almost put the horse before the cart. Because the main thing, if you want to understand Vermeer's art, and this is a fact that has been known for a long time, Montias discovered it, my mentor, as it were, Montias discovered it, or he could never have dreamed where it would lead. He discovered that essentially every single one of Vermeer's major pictures, I mean literally every single one of Vermeer's major pictures, every picture any major museum would want to borrow for a big retrospective of Vermeer, bar maybe two, was painted for one family. One husband, one wife.
So essentially he had one patron.
Only one patron. And all of Vermeer's paintings hung in one house. So if you didn't know those people, and they were quite secretive, you could never know anything about the paintings of Johannes Vermeer.
Wow.
And the great thing about Vermeer has always been this sort of mystery, which when he was rediscovered after 200 years of neglect, the man who rediscovered him, the French critic Théophile Thoré, said, how have we never heard of this great artist called Vermeer? I mean, it was an act of genius to rediscover him as an artist, because all of these paintings didn't have his signatures on. He only discovered him as an artist by deciding that they were all similar in style and feeling. Anyway, when he rediscovered Vermeer, he said, how is it that we never heard of him? Well, I can, on the basis of Montias, I can answer that. You'd never heard of him, Théophile, and the reason there are no biographies of him was because he was never famous in his own time. Nobody'd heard of him. And when this family passed away, all of his paintings were sold as Vermeer, because they did know that it were by Vermeer. And there were a few people interested in the pictures, all of whom were Remonstrants. So there was a kind of tiny community of people who knew about him and were interested, but they were very small. And within about 20 years, again, he's just disappeared. They've all been forgotten.
Within the Dutch Republic at the time, how big of a faction were the Remonstrants? I mean,
they were influential. They were more influential than they were numerous, right. But they were fairly numerous. In Rotterdam, there were a lot of Remonstrants. It was a sort of capital city of Remonstrantism, and Rotterdam is Delft is essentially a suburb of Rotterdam. Delft is 5 miles from Rotterdam.
And essentially their philosophy was enough with war, peace, understanding, liberal views on the world. And
they're the first church. They found themselves as a church in the 1620s when they've been sent into exile. They form themselves into a church, but they say, we are a church that does not claim to know the truth. So and they say, more or less, they say in their confession of faith, don't try picking an argument with us, because on anything that you decide to disagree with us, we'll just fold. It's fine, you believe what you want. We won't say that we're right and you're wrong, but we just would ask that you respect us too. And the only thing that we think is essential is to believe that the teachings of Jesus Christ, especially in the Sermon on the Mount, i.e., don't allow children to suffer, don't allow children to die in war, don't allow war to take place, love your enemy. If we all as human beings followed that advice, that the world would be a better place, that's all you have to believe. So in other words, everybody's a Remonstrant, because we all probably would believe it.
Well, I like the sound of them.
No, they're a really tremendous bunch of people. And they have a subset or a splinter group that comes off them, which I think Vermeer's patrons belong to. And these people are called collegiants. And they do they are remonstrant in that's who they are. But they say, at the moment when they're all sent into exile, they say, well, what about not having a church at all? What about just being Christians without a church? And they say, have you read Paul's epistles to the Corinthians or the Romans or the Ephesians? Because those are the earliest known descriptions of religious worship that we have in Christianity. And all of those worships seem to be taking place, those acts of worship seem to be taking place in the private houses, mostly of women, living in the ancient world. They don't seem to have had priests, and they all seem to have sung together, worshipped together, read the Bible together. But as far as we can see, there's nobody leading it. And that's what we're suggesting, that as an alternative. And in fact, they suggest this collegiate meeting as an alternative to having a church, a remonstrant church. So it's two ways of being extremely...
And do you think Vermeer was living in that way?
Yes.
Sort of worshipping privately in these private houses?
Yes.
And so
I'm sure of it.
Really encapsulates his life.
Yes. Put it in perspective, there are 2,000, between 2,000 and 4,000 collegiants. And these are the sort of extreme remonstrants, those who believe in worshipping Christ without even a church. There are 4,000 of them. And one of Vermeer's, without any doubt, closest associates and friends in Rotterdam is a man called Adrian Patz, who commissions, actually, he's the only other patron, as it were, but he only commissions 2 pictures. He commissions the geographer and the astronomer. He is the undisputed leader of the collegiate movement in the whole of Europe. I mean, Holland is where it is.
Those are probably my 2 favourite Vermeers as well.
Oh, well,
so he had taste.
He commissioned those 2 pictures. He's the leader of the collegiants, and he's an endless sort of tireless writer about toleration, the importance of toleration, freedom of conscience, freedom of worship. Never ever kill someone for their beliefs. He's constantly, whenever anybody in the Calvinist church has a go at the collegiate movement, he's there writing a pamphlet saying, no, this is the answer, toleration is the answer. Hugely brilliant, influential, fantastic man. One of the greatest men ever to have lived. Just an incredible man. Totally forgotten, leading person. So he's a collegiate, Vermeer's only other patron. And, for example, the first person ever to buy a Vermeer painting at auction in this sale that takes place after the deaths of his patrons, the first person that ever sticks up his hand and buys a painting is also a collegian. So the chance of those 2 things happening is, it's 1 in 8,000. So you multiply 8,000 by 8,000, you get 64 million. So 1 in 64 million, that's coincidence. So, Vermeer is like that. I mean, I did an interview with a sort of historian of the collegiate movement, and he said, if Adrian Patz supports and gives somebody his patronage, that person is either a very close friend of the collegiate movement or a dyed-in-the-wool collegian. So, there's no ambiguity or black and white with these people. If you're on their team, you're on their team. And at the end of all my work, when I'd written my whole sort of interpretation of Vermeer's paintings based on this stuff coming out, I got a phone call from Rotterdam from this guy who'd been helping me. And the one thing we hadn't managed to find out was, where was the house of Vermeer's patrons? They're called Peter and Maria. Where was Peter and Maria's house? The house of these remonstrant / collegians whose Vermeer painted nearly all of his pictures for.
It must have been quite a substantial house.
Big house, yeah. In a beautiful street. And he said, I found where the house was. And it's in the Oude Delft, which is like the Herengracht of Delft. It's the most beautiful street with the beautiful houses. And I said, where? And he said, it's near Butter Bridge and Pepper Street. There's a lot of, there's a food market around the corner, so all the streets are.
Right.
So I said, and he said, "You'll never believe this, Andrew. You'll never believe this." And he's the guy who found this is himself one of the few surviving remonstrants. There are very few remonstrants left, but he'd agreed to help me, and he was doing some archival research on my behalf. And he said, "You'll never believe where the house was, where all Vermeer's paintings hung." And I said, "Where was it?" He said, it's not just next to the Remonstrant Church in Delft, the hidden Remonstrant Church. It is actually the Porter's Lodge of the hidden Remonstrant Church in Delft.
So all of these paintings were in the church?
No, they were in the house that's next to the church. And there's a painting of it. And I went to see it, because you can still visit the place.
Oh, of course.
You can go here today.
The little street.
And you can knock on that door, which is not quite the same. This has been built over. You can knock on that door, and it's all student housing. The students live well in Delft.
Wow.
It's all student housing, and you go through there, and that, you can visit it. It's been rebuilt, but it's still in the same place. That is the hidden Remonstrant Church, and this was their house.
So this is where...
And there's Vermeer's signature. So if you could walk up to the windows...
You would have looked in and seen Vermeer paintings all over the wall.
All of Vermeer's paintings. I mean, not just a few.
Incredible.
And they didn't have other
This
pictures.
blows everything wide open. I've never heard anyone talk about Vermeer in this way. This is fascinating.
Good.
People talk about the view of Delft, the big explosion, his connection to certain artists, but this is a completely different reading of his life and the importance of his paintings.
Well, it's all based on very, very, it's based on signatures in documents, people who existed, real places. And the reason I brought that up is that, if you develop an idea about somebody's work based on the idea that they are part of a particular movement, and you write a whole book about it, and then having written your whole book, you discover that all along they were living next to the headquarters of the movement. It's like, wow. It's like...
It is amazing. It's incredible. A few years ago, you made a film about Vermeer.
Many years ago.
Years ago. What year was that?
1999. That's when I met Montias.
So this was the start of it?
Yeah, it was. And that film's completely based on, it's not true. Nothing.
But it was fascinating how you told his story of his life being... I mean, you made out like he wasn't wholly focused on painting, that he had many other things going on in his life. Well, that was fascinating to me.
I mean, I was just trying to... In light of what I knew, I was trying to make sense of the situation.
Yeah, so that's what I'm asking.
But now
completely different.
No, it's not completely different. What we now know. I mean, what's emerged from this is that there was a movement which was to do with trying to spread these ideas. They felt it was very important to spread these ideas. It's hard from the modern perspective because we don't carry the scars of history in the way that they did. So it's very hard. But if you try to understand the world in which these people lived, in Vermeer's lifetime, 2/3 of the entire population east of the Netherlands, all the way to Czechoslovakia, the so-called German lands, but much more than Germany, 2/3 of everybody there died. And the 1/3 that was left had either been appallingly violated or dismembered to the extent that they only had one arm or one leg. So this is the whole of Central Europe has been ravaged beyond belief by war, to the extent that the famines that followed that lasted until the early 20th century in some parts of Czechoslovakia. So this is utter carnage. I mean, if you measure war in terms of fatalities in the civilian population, that war, the 30 Years' War, was 8 times worse than the Second World War. And the Second World War was atrocious. So if you imagine atrocious times 8. So these people believe passionately that the time for peace has come. They look at the calendar. 1666 is imminent. They have heard in the millenarian legends that after a great terrible conflict, after a series of awful wars, peace will come to earth and it will last for 1,000 years. Jesus will return. Peace is coming. Peace is on the way. The Quakers believe that. The Puritans believe that. The Remonstrants and the Collegiants, who predate those people, they believed it first. And Vermeer and his friends really believe it. And each time they gather, these people, Vermeer's patron, his main patron is actually not the man, it's not Peter, it's Maria. Most of these amazing people, these collegians and these remonstrants, about 70% of them are women.
That's very...
And it's often the way, when a place is ravaged by war, it's the women whose sons have to be buried. Their husbands are dead. It's often the women who take charge. Yeah. These Dutch women, they haven't lost their husbands or their sons.
Most of his paintings are of women.
Most of his paintings are of women. It's because they are painted for the contemplation of women. Maria de Courtauld, his female patron, and her friends, who are mostly women, meet every week in her house. And they meet, as Jacobus Arminius had suggested that they should. These two paintings, these famous paintings, this one, which is in the Royal Collection, and the concert. Like many of Vermeer's paintings for her house, Maria's house, they're painted as a pair. And what they're intended to show us is the way in which these people sang music and prayed and hoped and waited for an ideal world, which we see in the paintings on the wall. There's Vermeer's foot. His easel is reflected in the mirror. So he's part of this congregation. Music is the cure for melancholy, but this wine jug is probably an allusion to Christ's sacrifice to save all of us. The empty chair, it's possibly a symbol of the fact that they are always waiting for Christ to come and join their gatherings, because when Christ returns, that's when peace will come to the world. But that's what these people are doing. They are gathering, singing. We are to imagine that this community of people could extend to more and would also...
But he's trying to send a message through his paintings.
He is depicting, when they meet, what they are modelling in the form of a gathering. They are showing anybody who chooses to come to the meeting, look, you're a Muslim, you're here. You are Jewish, you are here. I am Catholic. You are Remonstrant. We are all collegiants in this fellowship, because anybody can come. Anybody can come. All you have to do is believe that love thine enemy and suffer the little children is the way forward. You don't have to believe that Christ is God. You don't have to believe that he's the Son of God. You don't have to believe in him as divine, although they do mostly. So it was hugely open. And every time
it appealed to different religions as well as different people.
It allowed room for everyone. They were essentially fundamental, they were Christians. And so they believed that when everybody came to their meetings, they would listen to the word of Christ, because that's what they did. They read the Bible. And they would come round to believing in peace.
Can we talk about the view of Delft?
Yeah, you can talk about the view of Delft, or I can talk about the view of Delft. The view of Delft is
a number of years ago, you did an amazing piece of footage where you talked. Do you remember describing that painting? It's an amazing piece of footage. You describe how you love it, and you talk about the mystery of Vermeer's paintings, and you said how important it is to have mystery in paintings. If you understand a painting completely, you don't really come back to look at it. And if there's mystery in it, you keep coming back for more. And I thought that was one of the most profound things to ever say about a work of art, because it's so true. Why do I look at paintings again and again and again? There's always a mystery to them. And you were specifically talking about the mystery within the view of Delft. But yeah, could you...
I was possibly trying to let myself off the hook for not knowing what was going on in the picture, to a certain extent.
At the time. But it's such an incredible painting. It really is. What are your thoughts on it now?
If you look at the painting, it's a huge painting by Vermeer's standards. And Marcel Proust said it was the most beautiful painting in the world. It's been described as a topographical painting. It's a painting of a place, the city of Delft. But if it were just that, if it were just a depiction of some buildings seen across a stretch of water, why would anybody say it's one of the greatest paintings in the world. And I've spent a great deal of time trying to understand it, and I think I've understood the heart of it, which is that it's, when you first look at it, you see this extraordinary landscape, cityscape, which feels like peace itself, made permanent, made visible. But you can't quite, put your finger on it. What's going on? And then gradually, as you look at it, you realise it tells a story, which I always begin by explaining that these roofs here on the left-hand side of the picture, he's used a very strange and unusual technique. It essentially dates back to a medieval technique where you would grind pigment thick in order that fragments of the material itself, the pigment itself, would not be powdered but would still remain, so that they would all be little chunks, little bits of grit. And the point of that is that they catch the light so that they glitter. And if you can't see that in reproduction,
no,
but if you get up close,
because I've looked at this painting in Maurit's house.
In the Maurit's house. You can see it that when you get in close. You
and
can
it
see
is
that
stunning.
These
the
sparkle.
Technique's incredible.
Now, but the thing is, why are they sparkling?
Yeah.
They're sparkling because they're wet. They are wet. And that's unless you get that the roofs are wet, you don't get the picture. The roofs are wet. Why are the roofs wet? The roofs are wet because this cloud has just shed its load of rain. There's been this great storm. But now the storm has passed. The sun has come out. The sun has come out, and a kind of peace has come to reign over the world. The picture is not a representation of reality. It's not a picture of a real town after a real storm. It's the translation into paint of a dream. It's a prophetic vision. The gunmetal cloud that looms above us as we stare at the unbearably beautiful spectacle of what human life would be if only we would make it so, is not a cloud that a meteorologist could describe. It's the dark storm cloud of the 17th century, a century of death and destruction. Within it swirl the shades of a dirty, atrocious history. But one day, Vermeer says, one day that cloud will pass and this will be what we see. There will be no thunderbolts from heaven, no fluttering of angels' wings, and it may well be that everything will look exactly the same as it did before. The wind will blow, making shapes that fan out like whispers on the water. People will go down to the harbour, the usual family groups, including perhaps a mother carrying her child on her back. Women will do their shopping and stop to chat. It will look like nothing special, but that is exactly what will make it so special. An ordinary day in an ordinary town, a place blessed, but in a simple and achievable way by love and happiness, where war is just a memory. That's what heaven on earth looks like, through the eyes of Johannes Vermeer. The Delft of his prophecy is described in the Bible's last book, Revelation. A city with high walls and many gates appears to St. John the Evangelist. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and I, John, saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven. Transfigured in painting, Vermeer's hometown, for all its deceptive ordinariness, is that same holy city. He has given it the airborne spectral quality of a vision, so that it seems to hover between the sky above and the waters below, rising up from its own slate grey reflection, like a person waiting from a dream.
I'm trying to get inside his head a little bit and understand what he might have been thinking back then. I mean, he's painting these interior scenes mostly, and he decides suddenly, I'm going to paint this city view of Delft. You think he was really trying to interpret this peace that has befallen the city, this peace on earth?
1664, Adrian Patz's circle, which includes François van Hoogstraten. Samuel is François' brother. Vermeer owns a painting by Samuel. Vermeer's friends with other members of the group. They're talking about the end of the world. They're wondering what the end of the world's going to be like. This is a conversation they're having. I like. I'm not like interpreting this.
No, the whole of Europe was obsessed with the end of the world at the time.
No, these people are fascinated by it. But what makes the collegiant vision of the end of the world, it's not the end of the world, it's the new millennium, it's the 1,000 years of peace. So they say to themselves, they published this book, Daniel de Brehn, who's the main collegiant kind of prophecy of the apocalypse. And he says, yeah, the peace is going to come, but don't expect it to be like some of these other people think. You know, it's only going to be for the Calvinists. It's only going to be for the Catholics. It's only going to be for the Jews, because the Jews have their own millennial prophet. No, we don't think it's going to be like that. And do you know what? We don't even think that Jesus is going to come down. We think that what's going to happen is that everybody's going to read more books, and they're going to get more clever, and they're going to get more sensible, and they're going to realize that what Christ said about the children, and let's not have any more refugees, and let's not have any more towns being laid waste by bombs because they don't believe the same thing. All of that's going to stop because people are going to realize it's mad. And nothing's going to look any different. It's just going to look like your own hometown on a perfect day. That's what it's going to be like.
He was sort of right.
Yeah, well, I think he is right. Mm. There's a novel, completely separate. I don't think Vermeer knew it, but it's so much the same spirit as what Vermeer did when he did The View of Delft. There's a novel called The Adventures of Simplicius Simplicissimus, which is the story of a boy who's taken into slavery and made to fight in the 30 Years' War. And at the end of it all, when he's 40 years old, he's been fighting for 30 years, he gets away and he goes to Switzerland and he says, oh, I went to Switzerland and I went to a village and I went to all the orchards in the town hadn't been destroyed and cut down, and there weren't any dead bodies in the street, and you could buy bread in a shop without somebody trying to kill you. It was really strange. I could have been in Brazil or China. So there's this sense of... So I think, it's what I try to do if I write a book about somebody who lived a long time ago is, I think, don't write the book. That's what I try to say to myself, until I feel I know who your friends are. I know what they think. I know what you think. At least, even if I don't know, I have an idea.
Yeah.
I have an idea. And the more I looked into these, it was quite uncanny, because I think The View of Delft would certainly have been painted around 1665. It's one of his greatest pictures. I mean, in that same year, Maria, his patron, this just gives you a good idea of how unique this whole situation is. I mean, it might, because it's quite, I think people will find it a bit of a stretch to understand that Vermeer's doing something. I'm saying he's doing something really unique. He's painting pictures that look like topographical pictures, like The View of Delft, but they're really religious pictures. Or portraits that are really religious pictures, are really pictures about what these people believed. But you have to remember that the whole situation is really unusual. He's painting all his pictures for one person. And they've only got paintings by Vermeer, really. They haven't got paintings by other artists, not many. They've got a few, but it's clearly a Vermeer collection. It's like a collaboration. So, once you work out what they think, it's quite likely that Vermeer's doing it. And 1665, which is when I think he would have been painting The View of Delft, at the end of that year, Maria, his patron, goes to her lawyer to make her will. Her lawyer, guess what, is Adrian Patz, who's the great collegiant leader in Rotterdam. Her lawyer in Leiden is Adrian Patz, his first cousin, the eldest son of Adrian Patz, his father's brother. So, and he's a known remonstrant. Leiden's a remonstrant town. So, the coincidences mount up. 64 million to 1 begins to get, now it's 200.
So you're linking all of these lives together.
But every time anybody does anything, there's a remonstrant or collegian. Anyway, she goes to this remonstrant lawyer, and she makes a will, and she gives Vermeer this very large amount of money. Again, unique. The only patron in the known history of Dutch art, the only example of a patron leaving money in her will or his will to an artist. And she leaves enough money, and she leaves it in the section of her will that's all about family bequests. Maria, interestingly, what's in the rest of the will? She's his main patron. What else does she ask to be done with her money? 1/3 goes to the charity houses of the town so that the children may have bread mixed up with milk. Think of the milkmaid. What's she doing?
It's incredible.
Grinding
It's like saying, you know, all of Caravaggio's paintings, well, they were just in one house for hundreds of years, and no one had seen them.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about it like that, any other great artist, because Vermeer is, you know, one of the top 10 old masters in the world. Everyone loves Vermeer.
Yeah.
And his paintings uniquely were in this one house.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
And it's that there's never been an explanation for them, and then suddenly I come along and say, I've got it all in one go, the explanation for everything. But, you know, that might sound a bit strange, but on the other hand, it makes sense, because there's only going to be one explanation. If it's all in one place, there's one explanation for why it's all in the one place, and there's one explanation for what it all means. And there's no painting by Vermeer that was in that house that does not really, you know, without any kind of forcing on my part, just relaxes into a kind of, once you know that they're Remonstrants,
Can we talk about the astronomer, for example, because that's one of my, I mean, the View of Delft obviously is an absolute masterpiece, but the astronomer, I absolutely love that painting. And it seems to be about the new world, about this new world that was found, the new world that Britain and Holland and Spain are exploring. And it seemed to be this obsession with Europeans to explore the world. And I always thought that it was something to do with that.
Well, it is to do with that. And it may help you to know that Adrian Patz, who commissioned, he was one of the 17 directors, as well as being this astonishing collegiant, remonstrant, peacemaker, spokesman for toleration. He was also one of the directors of the most profitable company in the history of capitalism, the Dutch East India Company, still 8 times more profitable than Alphabet, apparently.
Insane.
Amazing.
So but Vermeer was very well taken care of during his life.
He was looked after okay.
Because there's also this big myth about Vermeer being, you know, penniless and struggling with all these children.
Well, he had one or two issues which I go into, but the heart of my book is not really, I mean, it is to a certain extent about his family life, but we stick on this just for now. So the Dutch East India Company, the patron gods of the Dutch East India Company are, of course, astronomy and geography, because astronomy shows the merchant skippers of the Dutch Navy where to go, and geography helps them to make their way around from A to B when they get there. So these are the two he's painted, and these pictures were commissioned. I should have said, Adrian Patz is close friends, evidently, with Vermeer. He's close friends with Vermeer's patrons, Maria and Peter. He goes to their house. The only other person who ever visits the house and even leaves a diary description of meeting Vermeer and looking at his paintings is married to Adrian Patz's first cousin. So again, everybody connects with everybody else, and they're all part of this remonstrant collegiate axis in Dutch society. The East India Company building is 300 yards that way from the Golden Eagle on the Oude Delft. I mean, it's a 2-minute walk. You can walk it now. You can go from you can go to the hidden remonstrant church if you can get the key. It's now a desanctified church. They use it as a disco, I think, from time to time. But you can go from the remonstrant church to East India House. So it was 300 yards from the house that contained all of Vermeer's paintings to the Dutch East India Company, where these two outliers, these two unusual examples of great Vermeers that weren't painted for the house, they hung there. These pictures are also millennial pictures. They're pictures looking forward to the time when 1,000 years of peace will come. I have seen a new heaven and I have seen a new earth. So even if you look at them on the wall next to each other, they are a pictogram of the most famous 2 lines in all of millenarian legend. I have seen a new heaven, I've seen a new earth. If you look on the wall behind the astronomer, there are other codes in anyway as well. We see the finding of Moses. So the finding of the most famous of the Jewish prophets. According to millenarian obsessives, and they could become quite obsessive, one of the things that had to happen before the second coming could occur was that all the Jews of the earth would have to be converted to Christianity. That was it. That's the legend says this must happen. And before that can happen, you've got to find the lost tribes. These are the Jews who've been dispersed among the world in the dark mists of time, and they're somewhere out there. Now, a lot of people thought that when they started going to Peru and they saw these people with dark hair, they said, "Oh, these must be the Jews of lost legends." So, as far as someone like Adrian Patz was concerned, I think, because he was very millenarian, the whole point of the Dutch East India Company is not to make oodles of money; it's to go and find the lost tribes.
Wow!
So he's commissioned. So you've got on his wall, it's like a reminder of my mission as an astronomer is to help the Dutch East India guys find Moses, i.e. find the lost Jews.
Incredible.
And there's other clues in the book about this, and I talk about it in great detail. But these paintings, Vermeer is always a painter working in codes. I mean, you haven't asked me the question, but I think it's a question that people will ask, is if Vermeer's pictures, like the Milkmaid, for example, I would say that the Milkmaid and the woman, one of the morals of the story, once you get your eye into what Vermeer's actually doing, all these paintings that are done for the contemplation of these religious people who believe in the fundamental values of the Christian faith. The pictures like this, the Milkmaid and the woman with the balance, she represents the charitable life. She's mixing milk with bread to give to the poor of the town, so she's acting on her Christianity. The other woman is checking on herself, checking on her conscience. How religious have I been? Have I done justice to my own Christian faith? And yes, I have. So they represent the inward and the external, the active. She's the active spiritual life, and the other lady, the woman with the balance, is the contemplative spiritual life. But you could, and it's sort of, as it were, the fact that they are pairs, which has never been noticed before, but it's, I think, incontrovertible. Once you've seen it, they are a pair. It's nailed down literally by the presence of this nail, which Vermeer borrows from a print by Rembrandt. And the nail is there, not just to indicate that the pictures are a pair, but to indicate that both these women hold in their memory all the time Christ's sacrifice, the nails that went through his hands and feet, symbolised by that nail there. It'll always be in any room they're in, there'll be that nail. But you could ask me, well, if they're so religious, why doesn't he actually paint? Why doesn't he paint Martha and Mary? Why doesn't he paint Jesus Christ? Why doesn't he paint the figures from the Bible? Why is it all in disguise? Why doesn't he paint the heavens opening and the new millennium happening and Christ coming down? And why does he paint? Well, partly in that case, because they don't think it's going to happen like that. But the reason he does it like this is that the collegiants began, and the Remonstrants began, as a semi-legal, proscribed society, a secret society, a hidden movement. And to a certain extent, I think those habits persist. They don't want people to know that their house is full of these new religious pictures.
So if by chance it was broken into, they were busted, they would look at the paintings and they wouldn't tell.
Sure, exactly. I mean, there's no chance of that happening in that period of Dutch history, but you never know if there were suddenly to be a retrograde return, as there is actually, in fact, in Dutch culture in 1672. That's another story. If there were to be a return to that sort of Calvinistic, theocratic, totalitarian culture, they could just say, no, they're just genre pictures. Oh, it's just a portrait of my daughter. But I think perhaps that's one reason. But I think perhaps the most sort of compelling reason for them to invent this new kind of contemplative, meditative, religious painting that Vermeer's paintings are, is that they come from within Calvinism. They are iconoclastic in their essence. They don't want pictures of Christ and the saints. They smell of iconoclasm.
Yeah,
they don't want that.
They want to paint the everyday.
They don't want images of the actual figures who are described in the Bible, because that would smack of the cult of the saints or idolatry, things that they, as Protestants, distrust fundamentally. But what they want, they read the Bible all the time. They don't need to see Jesus. They see Jesus in their mind's eye anyway. They want pictures that will, in their terms, encourage them to think about their own faith, or will demonstrate to other people why they do what they do. You know, we meet as collegiants and we play music because we are hoping that by doing so we are going to bring the Spirit of Christ down, because they think of themselves as actively bringing the Spirit of Christ. You know, a collegiant would say, well, I'm talking to you. If you imagine I'm a collegiant, I'm talking to you to try and persuade you to share my opinion that all the wars must stop. And the more people I talk to, the more people like you that I can convert, and you'll go out and do podcasts about the fact that the war should stop as well. The more we do it, the more it'll grow.
We're spreading the word.
We're spreading the word. And interestingly...
And at the time, this was fertile time for ideas. I mean, you had the Protestant Revolution, you had the things going on in England with, you know, Catholics and Protestants. You know, this whole time in Europe was just a melting pot of religious fervour and ideology.
It was, but also the Dutch Republic is the absolute centre of the development of thought in the West at this point. 50% of people can read in the society. Everybody lives in a town, more or less. They've got newspapers, they're talking. It's like Paris 70 years before, or 90 years before Paris, when it becomes the centre of the Enlightenment. And what we're talking about here, and that's what I think, the thing that's, you know, because it's one excitement after another. So as you can see, I'm very excited about the book. But what is most exciting to me is not, I've solved the great Vermeer mystery. That's not what's most exciting. I mean, of course, it's exciting to think that there is a coherent logic to all of his pictures and that they are arguing something. But what's amazing is that the people to whom the group to which he belongs, these collegiants and these remonstrants, but Adrian Patz, but especially these women, they're just such brilliant people. I mean, the women, I've got some wonderful archive sort of interviews, because some of the collegiant women get called in to the local Calvinist consistory because they're actually members of the Calvinist church, and they go AWOL and they start doing these meetings. So they say, what are you doing? What are you doing? Women aren't allowed to speak in religious gatherings. Everybody knows that if Christ had wanted women to speak in their religious gatherings, he would have had female apostles. And they say, because that's the thing, these are possibly, and maybe they're among the very few Christian gatherings since the very dawn of Christianity. There's almost nothing for centuries and centuries and centuries. It's priests, it's bishops, it's men, handing God's word out to women and men alike, but no women ever allowed to speak in a church, never allowed to voice an opinion, never allowed, apart from crying when they're baptized. They have no voice. And suddenly with this collegiate movement, it's like, no, women and men are equal. Because they go back to basics and they look at Paul, and Paul's epistles show that he gives his epistle to the Romans. I think he gives to a woman called Phoebe, take this to Rome. So clearly he's using women. And there's some just wonderful bits where they say they particularly venerate Mary Magdalene, these collegiate women, because and they also are very close to the Quakers. And there's a Quaker called Margaret Fell who's really in with the collegiants and loves the collegiants. And she writes a book in English called Justifying Women Speaking, i.e. why women should be allowed to speak in religious meetings. And she says, well, if you men who say that women shouldn't be allowed to talk, well, may I just remind you that you remember Jesus Christ? Do you remember him? You Christians, do you remember him? Yeah, he died, didn't he? And then he came back to life. And guess who did he show himself to when he came back to life? Was it not Mary Magdalene? And what would have happened if she kept her mouth shut? Then the apostles would never have known. And then the whole of humanity wouldn't have been saved. So don't tell me women shouldn't speak. Oh, wow. Isn't she brilliant? And which takes me very naturally to possibly the most famous painting in Vermeer's whole oeuvre, The Girl with the Pearl Earring. Yes. Because who is this? This is Maria, Vermeer's patron, her daughter. And what's she called? She's called Magdalena.
Magdalena.
And who is she?
You're saying this is Maria?
No, this is Vermeer's
patron called Maria.
Vermeer's patron's daughter. She's got a daughter.
So the patron's called Maria and the daughter's called Magdalena.
And the patron's mother is called Magdalena. Magdalena, mother, Maria, Vermeer's patron, Magdalena, daughter.
Right.
And we come to the 1696 auction. This picture is described as a trogno, which means a portrait of somebody who's in the character of somebody else.
Yes. Rembrandt paints a lot of
in fancy dress. And then suddenly, once you know that, I think suddenly the painting will reveal itself.
But you don't think this is a tronie? You're saying
It's a tronie.
Oh, it is. So it's a tronie based on the daughter of Maria, his patron.
Yeah.
Right.
Dressed in biblical fancy dress.
And one of the most famous paintings in the world.
Yes.
And if you were to say to Vermeer, if you could go back in time and meet him when he was alive and say that one day, Johannes, this will be one of the most famous paintings in the whole world, loved by millions, what do you think he'd think?
He would be pleased, but I think he might not be so pleased to have read some of the interpretations that have been given to it. So, if the girl who sat for the painting is Magdalena van Rauven, which figure in the Bible might she reincarnate? There can only be one answer. Magdalena had been named for Mary Magdalene, like her grandmother. There was a family tradition of venerating Mary Magdalene. So, Girl with the Pearl Earring brings us face to face with Magdalena van Rauven in the persona of Mary Magdalene, follower of Christ. Towards whom does the girl in the picture turn? The answer to the last, I've asked 3 questions at the beginning of this chapter. The answer to the last of our 3 questions is to be found in that passage in John's Gospel where Mary goes to Christ's tomb in search of his body. A text close to the hearts of many collegiant women. It's worth quoting in full. Mary stood without at the sepulchre weeping, and as she wept she stooped and looked into the sepulchre and saw 2 angels in white, and she asks them where the body of Jesus had lain. And they say unto her, Woman, why weepest thou? She saith, Because they have taken away my Lord, and I know not where they have laid him. And when she had said thus, she turned herself back and saw Jesus standing, and knew not that it was Jesus. Jesus said unto her, Woman, why weepest thou? Whom seekest thou? She, supposing him to be the gardener, said unto him, Sir, if thou have borne him hence, tell me where thou hast laid him, and I will take him away. Jesus saith unto her, Mary. She turned herself and saith unto him, Rabboni, which is to say, Master.
So this is the girl with the pearl earring turning as you described.
Yeah. Vermeer conjures up Mary in this instant as she turns back to the gardener whom she has just understood to be Christ. The look on her face is dawning recognition, wonder, awe, humility, love. There is the suggestion of tears recently shed in her bright and liquid eyes. The pearl at her ear is impossibly large because it is no jewel, but a reflection of the state of her soul, bursting with joy and irradiated with divine light. She's the first person in all of history to see the risen Christ, to speak with him. Once she has got over the shock of it, she will tell the rest of the world what she, and only she, has been given to know.
Well, that does make more sense now, doesn't it?
Well,
you know,
that she was at the age when you would be baptized when the picture was painted. So this picture, in my opinion, was done to mark that moment.
Right.
When, because they didn't believe in baptizing children. Because if you were going to devote yourself to following Christ's teaching and acting on it and taking his message into the world as they believed you should. And remember, she's a child of rich parents. They're rich, these people. So she will have a lot of time. Maria, in her will, leaves 1/3 of all her money to the refugees of war. I mean, these people practice what they preach. So you've been called Magdalena for a reason. It's like not, this picture is there to tell her every day that you've been called, remember that encounter, that moment. And the other thing about the picture is that when you're looking at it, you're Jesus.
Yeah.
So it's telling you to remember to follow Jesus every day, or to stand in Jesus' shoes, because you're standing in Jesus' shoes when you look at the picture. And these people really believe that.
Yeah.
So it's not like a clever trick. It's, oh, look, it's Mary Magdalene.
Yeah.
It's a message to her.
Yeah. Well, how did this language get lost over all those hundreds of years? It seems like that's how they would have thought back then, but we kind of lost that language to naturally think like that. I mean,
they're quite personal paintings. They're quite private. They aren't paintings that are they're paintings, I think, done by somebody who's part of this group, who's one of the greatest artists who's ever lived. And just as they employ, the collegiants employed, by the way, I discovered by meeting people who are experts in Dutch music, said they employed the greatest musicians of the 17th century. They worked for the collegiants. All of the only good hymns ever written in the 17th century were written for the collegiants. Calvinists didn't write any good ones. It's only them. So they've got this great artist, Vermeer, and he's painting these pictures of very personal, deep encouragement. But they don't parade. They're not like sort of a Caravaggio painting tells the world that the world should believe this.
These very Catholic sense.
Very open, performative, designed to be in churches with 10,000 people in 1,000 people in a chapel. The pictures needs to be expressive.
Cinematic.
Whereas Vermeer's paintings, if you imagine a congregation of, I think they have different audiences as well. From my research, there are people like that is for Magdalena herself. But if you go in as a male friend of the family and you go and look at the picture's possibly got a slightly different meaning for you. You understand it's a portrait of her as Mary Magdalene, but then the message for you as a man is maybe more, gosh, this picture's telling me that I better stand in Christ's shoes. I better go and... So it's saying something similar, but it's different to each person.
Yeah, absolutely.
And interestingly, one of the things that is clear, I think, again from the research, is that some of the pictures are referred to in inventories as having doors. So they had doors. So like old-fashioned altarpieces, portable altarpieces, kind of domestic altarpieces that still, you see them in museums today, paintings done for, a French princess to take away in her carriage so that she can always worship Mary. They had doors on them.
You could literally open these doors and just have this moment of
have
contemplation.
this moment. But for these pictures, it suggests to me that they may almost have had a ritual significance, so that we know, for example, that the milkmaid and the woman with a balance, I think, both had doors on. And as a pair, I think they would have hung close to the entrance. And I think the contemplative woman probably would have been open when you arrive in the house, because you're going in to read the Bible and to contemplate. But when you come out, as you pass those two paintings on your way out, that one will be closed and the other one will be open, because you're about to go out. And like the milkmaid, you should be going out and being charitable. So there might have been, we can't tell. Wouldn't it be lovely to be able to go into the little street painting and open the door and
but you're bringing this back to life. You're bringing this whole moment of history, of Dutch history, important moment, back to life. I mean, it really is the golden age of the Dutch Republic, and it just brings it to life. These little congregations, these religious congregations, this view of the rest of the world, the new world. How did they view the new world? How did they view their own small congregation? It's really fascinating. It's a fascinating period.
I mean, the other thing about them is that, which is my final excitement about it, is that Adrian Patz, I think he's the sort of father figure to all of them. He's the mover and shaker of the collegiate movement. He's the man who makes it all happen. He's Vermeer's patron. He's on the board of the Dutch East India Company. He's close to the centre of power. He's a very trusted associate of the Prime Minister of the Dutch Republic. When France invades in 1672, it's Adrian Patz who's sent to Spain. He negotiates an alliance. He gets the Spanish to join up with the Dutch to repel he's a big meal.
Wow.
But not only that, he is the man who takes the heroic message of Jacobus Arminius about, even though my family's all been killed by the Catholics, I'm still going to say I want to be friends with the Catholics. He takes that message of toleration and he broadcasts it. And the last section of my book, he's the patron of Spinoza. I mean, can you believe this guy? He's the patron of Spinoza and Vermeer. And in the last 10 years of his life, he becomes the patron of Pierre Bayle, who's the first of the French encyclopedists, and John Locke. And he takes John Locke to a collegiate meeting. And as a result of that experience, John Locke writes the letter on toleration, which brings the ideas of Arminius and Patz into the centre of Enlightenment thought. Voltaire reads John Locke. He writes on tolerance. That then becomes one of the foundation stones of the Charter of Human Rights and leads by a very clear, traceable line of ideas to things like the abolition of slavery. So this
and
group
Pats is literally at the centre of
he's
all
at
of
the
this.
centre of all of that. So he's one of the key forgotten figures in the history of Enlightenment.
Is there a portrait of him?
Yes, there is a portrait of him. He is there.
And who painted that portrait?
I cannot remember. I know it more as the portrait of Pats. I'm sure it's in our notes. But that's the man, and he's
quite the man.
So what I was excited to give Vermeer back his milieu, and to reveal that people like Pats are very close friends to him, and probably his paintings mean things to them that would have explained them in ways that we can now begin to understand because we know what they thought, and that the painting, because Pats was a very much also, what did he speak up for? Toleration, the right of women to be regarded equally with men, the pacifism, freedom of speech, freedom of conscience. Most of the foundations of modern free democratic societies. And you can't really find anywhere else in 17th century Europe, I mean, to a certain extent Britain, but not, and much less extent France, actually. Because we are so used to thinking of the Enlightenment as being fundamentally an English, French, maybe slightly German phenomenon.
But at this time, the Great Fire of London was happening.
Yeah, but these people, they are part, I believe, of a forgotten. Not only has Vermeer got his own history back, but I think what I hope to have managed to persuade people, or what I'd like to persuade people anyway, is that not only that he's got this fascinating history, but it's not like he's some part of some small sect. Yes, they are idiosyncratic. Yes, they are Dutch. Yes, you've never heard of them. Yes, they're fundamentalist Christians. But they played a hugely important part in the formation of the values of today. And I was so pleased because I tried to explain all this to the Penguin people, and they were like very receptive to it. And I'm talking about the people who kind of go out and try and sell the foreign rights to your book. And the first country, the first territory that had purchased foreign rights in the book was Ukraine.
Oh, really?
So, which I was just really chuffed about.
Wow.
Because I think, because that's the point. The book's about the fight for freedom, or it's one of the things it's about.
Yeah.
And that unlikely though it may seem, Vermeer's actually part of the history of that battle for, respecting people's opinions and freedoms to choose who they want to be.
I didn't expect this interview to go the way it's gone. It's been absolutely fascinating.
Good. Well, thank you very much.
And your book is called?
It's called
Vermeer, A Life Lost and Found.
Yes, very much lost, and I hope, pretty much found.
Thank you so much, Andrew.
Cheers.